All right, let's get into a really fascinating puzzle. We tend to think of health risks as being pretty straightforward, right? Smoking is bad for you, exercise is good. But what if I told you that sometimes a risk factor can behave in ways that seem to make no sense at all? I mean, seriously, think about that. Can something be a real danger for one person, but for someone else it's totally neutral, maybe even helpful? It sounds completely contradictory, but that's exactly the mystery we're going to solve today. So, check this out. This is our first clue. Researchers were looking at the connection between having a high anger personality and getting heart disease. And they found that for people with normal blood pressure, yeah, being angry a lot was definitely linked to a higher risk. But, and this is the wild part, for people who already had high blood pressure, that risk just, poof, it was gone. The connection wasn't there anymore. So what's the deal with that? How does a risk factor that's so clear in one group of people just vanish into thin air for another? It's like the fundamental rules are changing depending on who you are. Well, it turns out there's a really powerful concept that explains exactly this kind of thing. And the key that unlocks this whole puzzle has a name. It's called epidemiologic interaction. Now, I know it sounds a little jargony, a bit of a mouthful, but the idea behind it is actually super intuitive, and it explains almost all of these bizarre findings. So what is it? Simply put, interaction happens when the effect of one risk factor changes because another one is also present. The key idea here is that their combined effect isn't what you'd expect. It's not just 1 + 1 = 2. It's something totally different. You can think of it like players on a sports team. Risk factors don't always act alone. Sometimes, two factors team up and their combined effect is way more powerful than you'd expect. They amplify each other. Other times, they can get in each other's way and actually cancel each other out. That's what's happening with our health. Okay, so to really measure this teamwork between different risks, scientists have two main ways of looking at it. Think of them as two different lenses to view the exact same data, and each one tells us something important. So here they are. On one hand, you've got the additive model. This one is like stacking blocks. It's all about counting the total number of extra people who get sick because of the risk factors. On the other hand, there's the multiplicative model. This is more like compound interest on an investment. It looks at how much the rate of risk gets multiplied when you combine factors. Let's dig into that additive model first. It's asking a really practical question. How many actual people are we talking about here? It focuses on the real-world public health impact, the raw number of extra cases of a disease that show up when two risk factors are in the mix. Now, the multiplicative model asks something a bit different. It's not about the raw numbers, but about the odds. It asks, by how much did the chance of getting sick increase? Did the risk double, triple? It's all about that relative change. Both are useful, for sure, but one of them is absolutely crucial for making real-world decisions. And that brings us to what I like to call the public health clue. See, when you have to decide where to put your time, your money, and your effort to stop people from getting sick, one of these models tells a much more important story. Okay, let's look at some data here. We're comparing the risk of a disease based on two things, smoking and family history. Now, if you look at the relative risk, you see something curious. For both groups, people with a family history and people without, smoking doubles their risk. The number is 2.0 for both. So from a multiplicative view, it looks like there's no interaction. But now look at the attributable risk. This is the number of extra cases. For smokers with a family history, smoking is causing 20 extra cases. But for smokers without that history, it's only causing 5. So that brings us to the million-dollar question, right? If you're running the public health department and you've got a limited budget to run a stop smoking campaign, which group of smokers do you target to prevent the most cases? Well, this bar chart just screams the answer at you. It's not even close. Smoking causes 4 times as many cases of the disease in the group that also has a family history. This is additive interaction in action. The relative risk was the same, but the absolute real-world harm is wildly different. This is why the additive model is so critical. It helps us pinpoint the most vulnerable people. It shows us where a program, like helping people quit smoking, will have the biggest impact, the biggest bang for its buck, and literally save the most lives. But the story of interaction can get even weirder. I mean, way weirder. Sometimes it's not just about making a risk bigger or smaller. Sometimes a risk can completely reverse itself. This is the real plot twist that's going to solve our original mystery. It's called a qualitative interaction, or a crossover. And it's what happens when a risk factor is genuinely harmful in one group, but in another group it becomes harmless, or, get this, even protective. It just completely flips the script. Now you have to see this real-world example. It's incredible. Scientists were studying if high caffeine intake was linked to taking longer than a year to conceive. For non-smoking women, a lot of caffeine more than doubled the odds, an odds ratio of 2.3. Okay, seems like a clear risk factor. But for women who were smokers, that same high caffeine intake had an odds ratio of 0.7. It was actually linked to a lower odds. It was protective. I mean, just look at that side by side. It's staggering. The exact same behavior, drinking a lot of caffeine, is linked to a bad outcome in one group and a good outcome in another. This is a perfect textbook crossover. The presence of smoking completely changes the effect of caffeine. And this brings us right back to where we started. This crossover effect is how high anger can be a risk for heart disease in one group but have no effect in another. The high blood pressure was acting as that second factor, that context, that completely changed the story of anger's risk. So after all this, what's the big takeaway for us? Well, this whole idea of interaction gives us a much smarter, much more powerful way of thinking about health and risk. So here's how to think about it. First, remember that risk is almost never a simple one-size-fits-all fact. Context is everything. Second, always be asking what other factors could be at play here? What interactions could be changing the story? Third, when it comes to real-world impact, it's that additive risk, the actual number of people that matters most. And finally, keep an eye out for those wild plot twists, the crossovers, where a risk can literally reverse itself. There's a quote from the source material that just nails this. It basically says that when you have interaction, trying to calculate an average risk across different groups is pretty much meaningless. It just hides the truth. When factors are interacting, the real story is in the details of each specific group, not some made-up average. So the next time you see a headline about some new health risk, I want you to just pause for a second. Ask yourself, what else is going on here? What's the context? What hidden factor might be changing this entire story? Because as we've definitely seen today, in the world of health, context isn't just important, it's everything.